Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I'm not going to lie, I've been drinking. It's 5 p.m. on Friday, and I've been at a marine trade show. And these shows, they're filled with gnarly dudes, and happy hour there starts at 2 p.m. So I was able to connect with Matt Jackson and the whole Grundens crew, and they had this whole thing where they made hats for people and they put patches on it, and they're putting out beer at 2 p.m. And you know what? I imbibed a little bit, probably a little bit too much for this intro. Probably the first intro that I've recorded where I've drank this much beer. I've definitely had one interview before where I had been drinking a little bit too much. That was with Pat Milbury, and I'm embarrassed about that interview, but if you want to hear me drunk on a podcast, well, that's the one to do it at. But anyway, I was hanging with the Grundens crew at this trade show. I sold a lot of stickers, and it was really, really fun. But holy shit, how time flies. It's Thanksgiving week, and before we know it, Christmas is going to be here. Ange has been gone for 5 months, and she's missed her first major milestone. Keaton got his license on Wednesday, so watch the hell out if you're in West Seattle. Well, I'm stoked for him. It sucks that she's not here to witness this, and for everything else that she's not able to witness. But the crazy fucking thing, and yes, I said a bad word and I didn't really need to use it, but I did because this thing is really crazy, is my insurance went from $80 a month to $834 a month. That is insane. If you're an insurance agent and you can help me out, please do. My girl Ashley at my insurance company, she says she may be able to negotiate my rate with other companies by bundling, which I already do, but shopping myself around to other companies. She might be able to shave a couple $100 off this insurance rate. But you know what? I'd rather work with you, a listener, than Ashley, a person I've never known and is telling me that I have to pay $834 a month. So if you sell insurance, please talk to me. I would love to work with you. What else do I have for this intro? Let me think. One thing I uncovered recently, most likely the last new thing I'll find from Ange, was a bucket list thing that she wanted to do. The list wasn't really full, but this one really hit me hard. One of the things that she wanted to do in her bucket list was she wanted to take ski lessons without Keaton and I knowing that she took ski lessons. And then she wanted to surprise us by going skiing with us. I think it said that she wanted to surprise us by taking a run with us. And that would have been so cool. And just reading that, it was so hard. And you know, I keep telling myself I need to get over this shit and be a different person in 2026. But I don't really know. I do know that I'm not happy right now. And this is the first time I've really ever felt like that in my entire life. It's made me question everything. And it's probably the driving force behind me wanting to shut down this podcast at 500 episodes. And that's right, I think I've said it before, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to change directions at 500. Maybe a different podcast, maybe something completely new. Who knows? But for now, I'm going to have a kick-ass guest list to take this thing to the finish line. And this week is one of the most legendary dark men desk jockeys in skiing that I've ever had. I'm talking about a 30-year-plus U.S. ski team veteran guy who's been to 11 different Olympics. I'm talking about Tom Kelly. Tom Kelly has more history in the sport than almost any guest I've ever had on the show, so it was cool to get his insights and get his story about his life and times. But before I get into it, I want to do what I always do, and I want to thank you for listening each and every week. I want to ask you to do a few things for me. The first is to tell a friend about the show. While I don't have a built-in audience because I'm not a professional athlete, I've built a pretty solid audience because I do great interviews. And if you like my interviews, I think your friends are going to like them too if they have shared interests with you. So please tell them. It really does help the show grow. What else helps the show grow is something that you never ever do, is share my social media posts. So don't be afraid. Just hit that share button or whatever that triangle is on Instagram. And it really does help the show grow, because when you hit share, it allows a lot of other people to hear the podcast that you couldn't even imagine. That's how the algorithm works, and I don't understand it either, but please help me out there. Finally, I guess, I want you to support my incredible sponsors who make this podcast happen. I am talking about Elan Skis, Best Day Brewing, Outdoor Research, Therm-ic USA, Descent Labs, and Stanley. Please listen to their ads and buy their products. Now it's time for the podcast, so let's talk to Tom Kelly. While I normally interview a ton of different athletes, their careers really don't last as long as yours, Tom, because you've
been like an absolute machine in the world of snow forever, it seems like. And even in your retirement, you're doing more than most, which is crazy. It's like you're 72 years old and you should be relaxing and traveling, but you're still living the work dream. And I'm not really sure what your role is with the Olympics in 2026, but I'm positive you have to be doing something. Will you be there, or what do you have going on around the Olympics in Italy?
Oh, yeah, I've got a lot going on. And, I just love what I'm doing. I actually retired in 2018, but I am, as you said, Mike, I am actually busier now. I just love it. So I'm actually 73. My wife is 83. And between the two of us, we're probably the two of the most active people. But we just find that's how you get the most out of life. And it just really helps to keep us young.
All right. So what do you got going on around the Olympics? Where are you going to be in Italy?
When I retired from U.S. Ski and Snowboard in 2018, my ambition was to work with smaller sports to share my knowledge, share my network, and really help these smaller national governing bodies to really do their job and to really take some of the experience that I was fortunate enough to glean and share it with the next generation. And, in that sense, I worked with U.S. Biathlon, U.S. Speed Skating, USA Climbing, and a bunch of others. And that was great. And then along the way, in my work with the Utah Sports Commission, which is an amazing organization that brings major sporting events to Utah, I started working on the Olympic bid back around, 2019 or so, just continue with that. And right now, my biggest client is the 2034 Olympic and Paralympic Winter Games in Utah. And that is just an exhilarating experience to work with that. So yes, I will be in Milan Cortina. I will mostly be hunkered down in Milan. Don't need to go out to the venues. I've actually worked all of those venues. It's going to be an amazing games. It's just going to be a lot of travel time for people who want to get around.
Okay. And while I guess I'm getting way ahead of myself we're getting way ahead of ourselves talking about 2034, I'm going to stay ahead of myself. I mean, they're bringing you in because you know all the ins and outs of bringing an Olympic event to Utah. You've done that before. And when you think of it, it's got to be one of the highlights of your life and your career when Utah gets the bid for the 2002 Olympics. What was the night like when you found out that you actually got what you had been working so hard for?
So in 2002, I was working for U.S. Ski and Snowboard, and we were obviously very closely aligned with the bid committee. It was interesting back then. It was a different attitude for me. I mean, I was certainly excited. I remember when they got the bid, I did not go there. I did not go to the big festival in downtown Salt Lake, but I was very aware of it and very keenly aware of it. But the reason I was so motivated at that time was that bid was given out in 1995. But if you go back to the late 80s, 1988 and 89, folks may remember the Calgary Olympics was a real disaster for Team USA. It was a big disaster for the U.S. ski team. And New York Yankees owner, former New York Yankees owner, George Steinbrenner, had been the chair of the U.S. Olympic Committee at the time. And he put out a report that just really condemned the preparation of America's teams. And one of the things he pointed out was that America's teams needed more winter training centers. And our CEO at the time, a guy by the name of Howard Peterson, who was the one that really got me into the U.S. Ski Association, Howard latched onto that, and he went to the USOC and he said, listen, you should not give an Olympic city the right to bid for America unless they guarantee that they're going to build venues that work not just for the games, but that work for clubs and communities and training. And they bought into that, and that ultimately led to Salt Lake City, and it's what's led to the amazing legacy that's brought this sport culture to the entire state here.
In thinking about the Olympic Committee, because I guess there is a total separation between you being with the U.S. ski team from 1988 to 2018 and the IOC, although you're closely related to it, you probably know a lot of the people involved with it, and you're lobbying different people to get sports in, I would think, over your career. But if we think back to that one in 2002, and you think about the overall IOC, there's a history of corruption within their organizations. And one of the big stories back then was that 2002 Olympic bid and like the bribery, it sounded like, which, I mean, you're not involved in the IOC at that point, but did you hear or see, or you knew about the controversy that was going on, I'm sure. But what was going on behind the scenes there?
Well, I mean, not to minimize it, but they were really good marketers. I mean, they really understood who do we need to reach and how do we need to do it. It's just that the means that they used were not very ethical. And I don't know that anybody knew that was going on. No one knew, about some of the allegations that would later come down. But we knew that team there on the bid, the early team on the bid, was very engaged in figuring out who do we need to reach. And frankly, there were no guardrails from the IOC at that point. Out of that came a lot of systems that are in place today that really safeguard against that happening and really neutralize the playing field so that we're not picking the site that's going to pay off the most. We're going to pick off the site that's going to do the best job with the games and give back to community. So there's been light years of change with the IOC since then, but it's something that we as a bid committee were keenly aware of. And as an organizing committee now, we're very, very careful in those things.
I mean, it's got to be like you're almost the NCAA of 20 years ago and making sure no one's getting improper payments and things like that, because it's got to be on the straight and narrow, or you're going to be screwed in the media because the information gets out quickly these days.
Yeah, you don't want the news to get out. You don't want bad news to get out. But at the same time, you also want to do things ethically. And I've been involved with the bid committee from like about 2019 up until the Paris Award in July of 2024. And now I'm involved with the organizing committee. So it's something that we talk about a lot. We have a lot of safeguards built in. We have a board and various committees that really look after ethical considerations. And it's really paramount for us. That and the fact that we also are very, very focused on what we do for athletes. That's why we're doing this. We're doing it for the athletes, not for anything else, for the athletes and to welcome people to our state and to build the sport culture we have here.
And, while I bring up the corruption back in the day of the IOC and you kind of clear up that things have changed a lot, thinking about FIS, which you were definitely involved with as well, different animal. It didn't seem like people thought FIS was corrupt, but they definitely disliked and distrusted them. And this is all before you were part of FIS. I think you got to be part of FIS in 2005. But do you remember the F-FIS days back in the day?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I have a long relationship with FIS. It really goes back really to the late 80s and early 90s. So, I've seen a lot there. I go back to the days of Mark Hodler. He gave way to Gianfranco Casper and now Johan Elias. And, it's evolved a lot over time. Under Elias, it definitely is modernized a lot. I don't know, you can always find something to throw stones at, but the one thing that I will say about FIS is that it's a very wealthy organization, and Mark Hodler and Gianfranco Casper did an amazing job to bring in revenue and secure that revenue. And it's an international federation that really is real quite stable. Now, the last few years with Johan Elias has been quite interesting, quite different. He's done a lot to modernize, which Gianfranco Casper didn't do so much, but Gianfranco Casper ran a really good organization. I really like Gianfranco Casper, even though he eliminated my committee chairmanship, which had nothing to do with me, but nonetheless, I did really like him. I was sad when he passed a few years ago. I'm not as involved today, so I'm just kind of a bystander, and just as a sports leader, I just kind of watch what's going on. And there are definitely some interesting things, and they're definitely modernizing it. At some point in time, maybe they'll even figure out television.
Well, it's really great to get your perspective, because there's not anybody in the world that has your history with these sports. And just listening to you talk, it's like, wow, I think I know a little bit about stuff, but then just hearing the depth and breadth of what you're talking about is just a whole nother level, which is why you're on this podcast. And back to Salt Lake City, when the Olympics comes to your town, it's got to be the busiest you've ever been in your entire life, I would think. And when you think about your role in that Olympics, when Bode wins a silver medal in GS, what's your day like from start to finish?
Well, I'll tell a story about what my days were like, but I also want to tell kind of the overall story, which is really quite opposite from what I expected it to be. But the day that Bode won that silver medal, I was actually at both. That was the combined event, and it was a downhill and a slalom. And in that downhill, that was one where he was kind of typical Bode fashion. He was up on one ski, and it was a great day. But I thrived for that environment. And by the time I got to Salt Lake City, I'd been doing that job for quite a few years, and my job was in the finish line to integrate the athletes with the television and with the media. And back in 2002, there weren't the kind of restrictions in place like there are today. So at that point, we actually, as a press attaché, we had access to the television zone. They don't have that anymore. But it's kind of a crazed environment. And, in my role, I was the one that took the athletes, be it Bode or Lindsay Vonn or Mikaela, whoever it was, and took them through the rows of media and said, hey, let's do this interview, let's not do that interview, and try to organize things as best we can to tell the story, to tell the story of our team, to tell the story of the athlete and their success. But, overall, though, when I went into that games in Salt Lake, and for those of you who've worked big events, you know that, it's crazy when it comes to your own town. When you're going somewhere and you're traveling around the world, you're going into an environment where you're 100% focused on that event. But when it's at home, you freak out about it. And I know that I was so freaked out about it. I live in Park City, but I booked a hotel room in Ogden and one in Park City and one in Salt Lake. So I had places to stay that was not my house. And I remember a day or so before the opening ceremony, I had my bag packed and I told my wife, I'm going to stay another day. And then pretty soon, I'm going to stay at home another day. And what I was finding was it was so easy to get around. It was such a good system. It was so easy to do my job that I could stay at home and I could come back to my family at the end of the night. And I never anticipated it would be that way because normally in Olympics, it's just absolutely crazy. But Salt Lake, it had a bit of mellowness because I knew where I was.
When you think about infrastructure and things being totally crazy and Salt Lake being easy and surprisingly easy for you, which is the worst of what you've experienced for you? Because you've been to what, 10, 12 Olympics now in your day and age?
Yeah, I've been to 11 and I'm a hard one to ask what's the worst because I don't look at things that way. So
like your travel and getting places, because you said everything was so easy in Salt Lake and you just stayed at home where you had plan B and C and everything taken care of. I'm sure in those other countries, when you had to figure out plan B and C, it was like, I have to have 3 taxis ready. You never know here.
But, in doing my job, that's kind of what I did. I'm going to tell a story about Sochi because I think this illustrates it. And actually, I have to say, when people ask me, what were your favorite games? Sochi wasn't my favorite games, but I really enjoyed Sochi. They did a really good job and the volunteers were great. But they literally, for those folks that remember that in 2014, they built cities, literally built cities. They built an airport. They built a rail network. They built railroads. They built highways. They built all of this stuff. And most of it wasn't ready when we got there. So I went from hotel to hotel, but I'd done this long enough that I kind of figured out a strategy. I said, okay, I know what my end game is. My end game was to get into the Marriott Hotel in Krasnopoliana, which was where the Alpine events and all the ski events were. And I went from one horrible hotel to the next. And I would just find things wrong, like, hey, there's no door on my room, or there's no light in the ceiling, or there's no Wi-Fi. So they would keep moving me. And one day they moved me to the Marriott. And I thought, I'm here, I am staying. And I think I had 3 rooms because I had staff people. And then after a few days, they came and they said, well, your hotel is ready. And I said, no, I'm staying here. I like this hotel. NBC is staying here. The food is great. The bus is right next door. The media center is right next door. So I squatted there for the next 2 weeks. The only downside of that was I had paid for our rooms through the accreditation system, but it didn't get transferred over properly. So about 6 months later, my Amex card took a $25,000 hit for the hotel room that I was in at the Marriott. And all the records were gone. But I had befriended the hotel manager, who was a German dude, and he was now working, I found, at another Marriott in Moscow. I tracked him down and they gave me a refund in rubles. So it all worked out in the end.
No way. So you actually had to pay for the hotel and the hotel paid you back, not the organizations paid you back?
I don't know who paid me back, to tell you the truth. That's a good question. But I know it took 2 tries because the first one, they sent me a mess of rubles. And I said, listen, the ruble is devalued about 20%. That's probably not the right number since the game. So you got to give me more. And they just sent me a bucket more rubles. And it all worked out. Part of the lesson here is you got to make friends along the way. You got to know who's the boss here? Who's the hotel manager? Who's the guy in charge of transportation? Those are I knew the accreditation people really well. And I stayed in touch with them actually for years. So when you do big events like this, as my friend Bob Condren says, you always have to know who's the guy with the keys.
I could not agree with you more. I used to, whenever I'd go to a trade show, I'd get the foreman on the phone before I'd go and I'd send him a box of a ton of K2 stuff. And then I'd get there and I'd be like, I'm the guy that sent you the sweatshirt that you're wearing. And he'd be like, oh, right. That's you. And then you could get whatever you wanted done.
Yeah, it's hugely important to do that stuff. It's little stuff like that, is having a pocket of pins and whatever it might be. But those are the tools of the trade when you're working internationally and you need to make friends in a foreign country and you don't speak the guy's language.
I would think the tools of the trade that you also have to have is You have to have a thick skin. You've got to have a lot of patience, and you've got to have the ability to take a phone call in the middle of the night saying, this dude messed up and you've got to clean it up. I mean, was that part of your gig? Was cleaning up people's messes a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, maybe not quite in those terms, but my responsibility was our public image and that of our athletes. So I do joke with people. I have a whole book of stories that I can never publish. But yeah, that was a part of it. It was like, how do I keep our organization and our sport and all of our athletes, how do I keep them in a good and a positive light? And yeah, there were middle of the night calls. There was some stuff that was just absolutely beyond comprehension, absurd, that happens. It's life. It happens with all of us. But when it happens with a public figure, it's a different thing. So yeah, I did have to manage a lot of that. And I'm actually pretty proud of how I've done that.
Yeah. I mean, were there those, like every Olympics, is there something that happens that we don't hear about? And the reason we don't hear about it is the PR guy, which is you, is making sure that no one has that story?
Short answer, yes. I wouldn't say it's every Olympics, but there's certainly, been a lot of stories. And some of them are a little bit more public. I think in 2006 in Torino, there were a lot of public stories about Bode. Bode was at a difficult part of his career at that point, and he was doing a lot of carousing. He was very public about that, and some of the other athletes were involved in that as well. And so there were a number of things in Torino. It was kind of a low point in terms of challenging stories. But out of that, organizationally, we came out of that, and I remember meeting not long after the 2006 games when we were getting ready for Vancouver. One of the things we did, I think this was right after Torino in 2006, is we took our leadership staff up to Vancouver. We did a couple days of meetings in the Pan Pacific Hotel. It was kind of our first introduction to the city, and we really did a debrief on what happened in Torino. What do we need to improve? And we did a lot of things differently after that. Part of it was how we related with athletes, how we really listened more to athletes and what their needs were. And I think the evaluation for us was we hadn't been listening to Bode enough. We hadn't been listening to what he had to say or what Julia Mancuso had to say. And we needed to pay more attention to that. And I'd like to think that we did a better job with that after.
It's time for my first sponsor break, and I'm stoked to have Therm-ic back on the podcast as a sponsor. Because when temperatures get nuclear cold, I don't hit the mountain without my Therm-ic Heated Socks. They are the original heated sock, and still the industry leader after 20 years. It's a total game changer. We all know that if your feet are frozen, you're not skiing or snowboarding at your best. And if you are, you're suffering through it. I make sure that never happens by always wearing my Therm-ic socks. Therm-ic's game-changing smart elastic technology heated socks are a world's first. These SET socks are a high-performance fitting, thin ski sock where the patented heating components have stretch instead of a bulky band and element. So you literally feel like you're wearing your normal favorite pair of performance ski socks. But if heat isn't for you, don't worry. Therm-ic has you covered with socks for winter with their athlete-tested and proven Descent line of socks. This is the #1 recommended sock by boot fitters in North America because for over a decade, Descent has engineered performance socks to eliminate things like chafing or heel blisters in your boots when you're touring or splitboarding. Descent socks have a distinct locked-on fit that never seems to change, no matter what you get up to. At the end of the day, Therm-ic and Descent socks are the go-to socks for the people that know. Drop into your local boot fitter and retailer and you'll see what I mean. Next up, it's Outdoor Research. And if you haven't checked out outdoorresearch.com in the past week or so, then you haven't seen the brand new winter line, which looks incredible. I could spend a lot of this ad telling you all the tech and why Outdoor Research is better, but know that in the 1980s and the early 90s, Outdoor Research built a reputation on functional quality outdoor gear that pushed the limits of innovative possibilities. And those who were function first were all about OR gear, because it was and it still is built better, and Outdoor Research is still pushing those limits of innovation. This year, the outerwear focuses on 3 new collections, the Cloud Chaser for backcountry and the Powderverse and Hemisphere collections for freeride, as well as some staples in the line like the Snow Crew collection. These outerwear systems are styled for and by athletes like Mark Adma, Troy Podmilsack, Zoe Aitken, snowboarder Neil Provo, and others, and that's why this outerwear collection not only looks so good, but each piece is more functional than ever, and they're all you're going to need in any conditions. To find out more about the new collection, head on over to outdoorresearch.com. My final sponsor this round is Stanley. And sure, you used to know Stanley for keeping your grandpa's coffee hot in that signature green water bottle. Well, they still make that iconic bottle, but Stanley is the talk of the world these days. And while they may have started with the Powell movement, oh how they have grown. Nowadays, icons like Messi and Caitlin Clark and Post Malone and Olivia Rodrigo are all swearing by their Stanleys. And I've been telling you about how incredible their products are at keeping your drinks hotter and colder than anyone else for over 8 years now. I mean, Stanley invented the category in 1913, and they're constantly innovating to make sure that you have the best. And I know I love having the best. Lately, I've personally been drinking more water than ever thanks to my Stanley Quencher. And when I go to the mountain, I've integrated Stanley food storage devices into my ski routine instead of buying that $20 burger. But I have to say, my all-time favorite Stanley products are their pint glasses, which I've used every day for 8.5 years or so. Like millions of people out there, I love all my Stanley stuff, and I want you to get on the Stanley program too. They give me their best discount code available, so you get 30% off of all your products. And to do that, you head on over to stanley1913.com and you go shopping, buy a ton of stuff because you're going to get 30% off of it when you check out and use the code Powell 2025. So that's all capitals, Powell, no spaces, and then the numbers 2025 2025. That's going to get you 30% off your Stanley products. Those are my sponsors. Now it's time to jump back into the podcast.
Julia, to some extent, and Bode for sure, are just a different type of athlete than almost anybody that you've had on the U.S. ski team. I mean, I guess Picabo is different as well, but Bode just seemed to be like an outlier. He did everything his way, and his way, especially on the race course, was the right way, even though everybody thought it was wrong until they looked at the time.
You're spot on with that. But, everybody's a little different, and that's what we have to really appreciate. I want to talk about Picabo, though, in that sense, because I actually just recently, she's going to be in a film featuring star professional athletes and what they've done to give back. So I interviewed for that a short time ago here in Park City. And one of the questions that I'm often asked is, when did you first meet Picabo? And I met Picabo in 1989. She was on a stretcher at Steamboat Springs. She had just blown her knee out. I knew of her, but had never met her before. But I remember her in this sled, kind of covered up with a blanket. All I could see were kind of her little peekaboo eyes sticking out of there. And she was going to be out for another year. But if you know the peekaboo story, Paul Major, our coach at the time, actually booted her off the team in the early 90s because she just wasn't getting with it. But those are the kind of lessons that, taught her and helped to make her better. But that's where I first started to see, if you're at the level of Mikaela Shiffrin and Lindsay Vonn and Picabo Street, Johnny Mosley, or whoever it is, you're going to be a little bit different, or you're not going to be at that level. You're going to have done things in your life a little bit differently, or you're not going to have achieved that success. So it's kind of my experience with Picabo in the early 90s taught me that I have to be really open to how each individual athlete wants to craft their career. Like Picabo, she wanted to be at center stage. She wanted to be reaching out to everybody and touching them. Hillary Lind at the time, her fellow downhiller, she didn't want that. She had a little bit different mindset. So being able to adjust to those different athlete needs and directions was pretty vital for me throughout my career.
You look at it as almost a big reaction to how the team was treating them, and at the same time, they're different people or whatever. But long before you had to deal with athletes and before you found the Olympic torch, you grew up in bitter cold Wisconsin, and we're not going to talk too much about your childhood, but an inspiration for everything that you've done in your entire life starts at 7 years old, which is crazy that you can pinpoint 7 years old. This is what really changed me. But you were watching the Olympics by yourself. I think Penny Patu wins Olympic silver at Palisades, Tahoe, which was Squaw Valley, USA back then. And when you saw that, were you totally hooked in and you were like, I need to find a sport where I'm going to be an Olympian next?
Yeah, and I tell that story a lot. I did a corporate gig the other night, and I told that story again. I tell it for a couple of reasons. One, it tells my story, how I got involved in sport. And it is a no BS thing. That honest to God happened. I'm 7 years old. Mom puts me on the couch, has to go to the store, no babysitter, turns the TV on. It happens to be. She didn't put on the Olympics. She simply turned the TV on, and there it was, the Olympics from Squaw Valley. So I dutifully sat and watched it. But I remember those following years, I didn't ski till I was 18, so 11 years later. But I remember that moment in time. And it drove me. It drove me like, okay, I like this Olympics thing. It's kind of interesting. I like skiing. This is kind of interesting. And that ultimately forged my pathway. But why I like to tell that story a lot is for people who have dreams of doing something, all you have to do is follow those dreams. And you have to figure out, what are the simple steps that I need to take? You know, it's just kind of the stepping stone up to the clouds. What do I need to do? That's how I forged my career. And I ended up in the coolest job I could have ever conceived of. But it all emanated from that one moment in February of 1960 when I watched the Olympics.
And I look at those stepping stones of your career and kind of wondering, and I was going to ask questions, they're like, are all these decisions that you made calculated to kind of find a job in the ski industry? Because it's like you take a photography class in high school, then in college, I think you go to school in Madison, University of Wisconsin, and you go to the Madison ski jumps and the national team's there and you're taking pictures of the national team. Were you doing that for fun, or were you doing it for a class, or was that like a calculated way of kind of getting your way into the ski industry?
So it's a really good question, and I think that fits into whatever path you want to take. In my case, I would not say it was a calculated strategy. I didn't sit down, as a sophomore in high school and kind of map out, here's how I'm going to do this. But I knew what my interests were. So I sought opportunities to connect my interest with something. So when I heard there was a ski jump in town, this is when I was probably 9 or 10 years old, I heard there was a ski jumping event in town. I would ask mom and dad, can you take me out to the ski jump to watch it? And I did that. And then photography was, honestly, don't know how I got into photography, but I did in a big way in high school. I love things happening. I love news. I love to go to sporting events and photograph them. I love to write about news. I worked for the local weekly newspaper. So I kind of had that journalistic instinct in me, which I later converted into public relations and communications. So none of those things were strategically thought out. But whenever there was an opportunity like that, I thought about, how can I do something here? How can I engage myself here in this? And that's how those steps were built.
And then you go get a job after you're taking photos and stuff in college. You get a job writing press releases and you're shooting photos and you win awards at that level. But then you move to Telemark Mountain. I believe that's, or Telemark, I don't even know where that is. But it puts you in the center of the Nordic nerds out there. It's like the home of the Birkebeiner, right?
It's the home of the Birkebeiner. And for the folks who don't know Telemark, and it's gone now, sadly, but Telemark was an Alpine ski area started by a really entrepreneurial guy, Tony Wise, who kind of was in the Midwest at the same time as Everett Kircher over in Boyne and many others. And, he just bootstrapped that business from 1947 on. And he developed an Alpine ski hill that had 370 vertical. Yes, 370 vertical. Billy Kidd in Ski Magazine once called it the only ski area where the lodge is bigger than the hill, because he built this 4-star hotel there, which sadly is also not there anymore. But he eventually realized that he was never going to be a world-class Alpine ski area, although his après ski was so strong, it was one of the more popular Alpine ski areas in the Midwest. But he learned from his Scandinavian friends that he could be one of the world's best cross-country ski resorts. So he developed that. In 1973, he started the American Birkebeiner race. In 1997, we had the very first FIS cross-country World Cup won by Allison Owen Spencer of the U.S. ski team. So he's doing these really cool things. And I had been at the newspaper as a photographer in Madison. That was kind of going to be my destiny. And in 77, we went on strike. I walked the picket line for about 6 weeks, which was kind of cool at start, but then it got pretty boring. But then I had an opportunity to go up to Telemark, where I'd been doing contract work, and take over as the PR director. I had no idea what I was doing, but November, I think 25th, 1977, I sat down at my desk, didn't know what to do. And all of a sudden this woman walks in and says, I'm a friend of the boss's wife. I'm here to work for you. And I kind of put her to work. I didn't know what to have her do, but here we are 48 years later, and she's my wife.
That's amazing. So you meet your wife in this hub because I would think at one point of the year, like that town just swells and it's crazy with that event. Can you describe how big that is?
Birkie's huge. And, when you think about it, you've got upwards of 10,000 people doing a point-to-point race, 34 miles through the middle of ever loving nowhere. And it attracts a huge, huge crowd of people. And part of it is that the culture of participatory sport in the Midwest is really strong. I don't think this could have grown up as well in other parts of the country. But Midwesterners, they just like to participate. So they were more than willing to go figure out how they could ski 34 miles through the North Woods. And then, Tony, always looking to kind of one-up things, he decided to take it up to the global level, and he partnered with initially 7 other races to form this series called the World Loped in 1979. And that is still going today, and hundreds of thousands of people have now done all of these similar races around the globe. But it all emanated from this crazy guy, Tony Wise, who came up with this idea in 1973.
That's pretty amazing. And so eventually Telemark closes and you run a travel business that keeps you skiing all over the world. We won't talk about that. But then how does the whole PR gig come with the U.S. ski team? Because in 1988, it seems like you pack up the family and you move out west.
So the travel company was a lot of fun. Worldwide Nordic USA, I did it in partnership with a friend, and we took cross-country skiers all over the world to ski in these various races. That was a lot of fun. But, it was a bootstrap business. I never had any real money in it, and I just wanted to get back to the core of what I love to do, which was public relations work. So I had an opportunity in '86 to Howard Peterson, who I mentioned earlier, brought me on to the U.S. Ski Association. I was Assistant National Nordic Director. And that was cool. I did that for 2 years. I worked in Colorado Springs. My former employee and I were about to get married. She had 4 kids, and we were going to move them all to Colorado Springs in '88. And then lo and behold, 1 week before our wedding in May of '88, the organization decided to leave Colorado Springs and come over here to Park City, Utah. So we just decided after the wedding, we'll pack up the kids and we'll just move them to a different place. And that's how we landed in Park City, Utah.
So is that when the whole merger kind of came back together between like the U.S. ski team and the USSA and all of that? Was that time?
Yeah. And we could spend a whole episode talking about the details of this, but skiing was crazily organized in the 70s and the 80s. There was a national governing body, which was U.S. Ski Association, and there was a completely separate U.S. ski team. And this had happened in the 70s when a number of the donors to the ski team wanted to break away from USSA. So they did, and they ran as separate organizations. USSA was in Colorado Springs, and the U.S. ski team was based in Park City. And at that time, it was just Alpine, cross-country, and ski jumping, and Nordic combined. That was it. So we merged together. My friend Howard Peterson became the Secretary General of the organization at that point, and things really started to evolve. If you can imagine, you're bringing together 2 organizations. Each one of them has a board of directors of about 60 people, and you merge those together. So now you've got a board of directors of about, 120, 130. So there were a couple of years where things were really difficult to get things done. But Howard was just a genius at really crafting things, and he just kind of shrunk everything, and we became a much, much better organization after that.
I mean, is that what you look at as kind of the official launch of the modern U.S. ski team?
That is a really good question. I'd say probably yes, but there's so many other pivotal spots along the way. If you make a timeline out and look at the things that we did, I mean, the 2 that I'll call out, one is the move to snowboarding, which was highly controversial, and this was done in the mid-'90s. But we initially at U.S. Ski Association, we had a group of parents from New England who came to us and said, hey, competitive snowboarding is just very disorganized. Can you bring in some of your expertise, like rules, scheduling, point systems, and so forth? So we did that, and we eventually started running snowboard programs. But as we did that, we also started to take heat from the snowboard community that thought we were skiers coming in to take over snowboarding, when in reality, we were just responding to the snowboard community. But there was a period of great angst then. The Snow Sports Industries America, led by David Enjemy at the time, friend to us, but they sued us. And it was one of those, I'll call it a friendly, constructive lawsuit. But I would say, as I look back on things, that we were instrumental in helping put snowboarding up a couple levels, but I don't think that we listened all that well back then. I don't know if you remember this story, and I'm looking around my office right now. I've got this little doll, Animal, which is a Jim Henson character. And I don't know, Mike, if you remember that.
Like a mascot, right?
He was a mascot. And we were so naive when we did that. We did a partnership with Henson. We bring in this mascot, Animal. And I remember so vividly going to a meeting at Transworld. John Stouffer was there. I can't remember who else. And we brought in the chief marketing officer of Henson, which cool company for sure. And we came there to introduce them to Animal. And I can't imagine what they were thinking of us at that time. They were very kind to us, but I can't imagine what they were really thinking. We didn't understand it. And over time, I think we did come to understand it. And I think that we did good by snowboarding. And at the same time, some years later, we also were instrumental in bringing free ski into the games. And we helped to actually get that in through the International Olympic Committee and become what is now a very formidable part of the games. But, I think we at U.S. Ski and Snowboard take some amount of credit for what we were able to start back then. But we were definitely naive in thinking about what the culture really is. We didn't understand that.
Well, you were able to create the platform for them to get themselves into the Olympics or to help get them into the Olympics. But at the same time, not understanding the culture and then just them being associated with skiing was definitely a problem with them, but it seemed like. And I don't think there's anything that you could do with Tom Kelly going into the Snowboarder magazine unless you're to come in there with bong hits for everybody. I don't think they would ever accept you right away,
We couldn't do that. But, I think this is another thing that, as I think back on it, that I am proud of is that even in those situations, I've found ways to make relationships and relationships that continue. Like I don't know if Fran Richards was in that meeting or not. I know John Stouffer was, but these are still people that I think respect me and have worked with me. And I do feel good about how I was able to get through those periods when my organization maybe wasn't listening properly. But I was able to somehow get through and keep positive relationships. So it is something I look back on somewhat fondly, and maybe that was my role. That's what I was there to do, maybe.
It's time for my second round of sponsors, and I'm going to start out with Elan Skis. While some of us wish every day was a powder day, that's not reality. And that's where the Wingman and the Wildcat come into play for men and women. Think hard-charging front-side skis that are designed to make you remember how fun carving is. And they're still versatile enough where you won't want to go switch skis if it snows or it gets choppy out there. Like almost every Elan, these are both award-winning skis from reputable sources like Ski Magazine and others. And Wingman and Wildcat aren't only super fun to ski, but they're going to make you a better skier. And while you can find out about Wingman and Wildcat and the Playmaker series and Ripstick over at elanskis.com, the place where the knowledge about Elan Skis and really everything in the industry is in your local ski shop. So go to one this fall, smell the wax and the P-Tex, flex the skis, and most importantly, talk to your local shop guy. The guy who's a real skier in there, and he can help you pick out what's best for you. So Elan wants you to support your local ski shop, and you can ask them what the right pair of Elans are for you. My final sponsor this round is Best Day Brewing, and now is the time to think snow. And skiers, snowboarders, weekend warriors, tubers, sledders, snowbikers, snowmobilers, snowshoers, sled doggers, shovel racers, snow angel makers, ice skaters, snowball fighters, igloo builders, you get it. The doers of winter are starting to get ready to shred, and post-shred, it's all about après. And this year, do après the right way. Forget about the calories, forget about the alcohol, forget about not taking more runs on the mountain, forget about getting in trouble on the way home, because with a beer from Best Day Brewing, you don't have to worry about any negative consequences. Just incredible flavor. Blind taste tests prove that you won't be able to taste the difference between a Best Day and your favorite beer with alcohol. The only difference you'll notice is how good you'll feel in the morning, and you're going to remember what you did last night, which is almost refreshing as a Best Day itself. To celebrate your best day yet, next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of Best Day. Or you can always buy it on your Alaska Airlines flight, Amazon.com, or head on over to bestdaybrewing.com to get the full assortment of Best Days. Those are my sponsors. Now, let's jump back into the podcast.
In the way that I know you first and foremost, Tom, is we're on the U.S. Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame. I don't even know what we're on. You're the head of it all. And I know that I'm in some meetings with you and we help kind of do a nominating committee. And you're this longtime skier that knows everything about skiing and everything about snowboarding when it comes to competitive stuff, more so than probably anybody in the world, especially in the U.S. And you are the guy who's bringing people like myself and snowboarders and anybody that will vote for a snowboard person, you're bringing them onto the board because while maybe snowboarding is not your passion, you realize that snowboarding has a big hole in the Hall of Fame. And even though we still keep electing all these people that maybe don't deserve to be in the hall before a lot of these famous snowboarders, it's the way that you carry yourself. And I think that's why you do get respect, is because you're advocating for what's right in whatever situation. And I think that's really important. And so in the US Ski and Snowboard Hall of Fame deal, this is your last year as heading this whole chair thing. You've been a godsend by doing it. But how does Mike Jaquith get this thing in the right direction moving forward?
Well, I appreciate your comments here, and I think that is something that I've always really tried to do. And the particular situation that you outlined, I don't know, it was 3 or 4 years ago. Actually, you ignited this. You ignited this with a podcast with Jimbo Morgan. And I remember vividly listening to that in my car. And my first reaction was, I was really pissed. And my second reaction was, well, they have a good point. So I had a decision to make as the chair of the selection committee. We were not doing a good job for snowboarding. So I'm thinking, do we get rid of it or do we embrace it? And I talked to a number of people, I might even talk to you then, and we decided to embrace it and bring more people on. And, to answer your specific question, what is Mike Jaquith, who's succeeding me as the chair of the selection committee, and he's going to be really good at this because he knows that side of the sport better than I do. But you just got to be open to other voices. You have to really listen. And I don't know where I learned this along the way. And my wife would probably say I don't listen. But I think you have to listen and pay attention to what people say because everybody's got a different viewpoint. And to use Jimbo as an example, he would have been somebody that wasn't on my radar at all. And after that podcast where the two of you chatted on this, I started thinking a little bit more and I started to do more research. And I got to tell you, one of the more emotional moments for me at a Hall of Fame induction came with his induction at Lake Placid last spring. And hearing from him personally about his story, that's the thing that, and I don't know if our sport's different than others, but I just think the people in our sport, the stories and the passion that they put into it really makes skiing and snowboarding a little different than every other sport. I don't know that there's another sport that has this kind of familial engagement as we do.
I just know that going to one of these events and seeing people accept their award, it's always an emotional experience. And with these athletes, they're not really put on the pedestals that the NFL guys are and anybody else. So when they can get this look back at their career 15 years afterwards and this celebration, it's really overwhelming and emotional. And it's something that you don't get everywhere else. And it's a pretty amazing thing, the Hall of Fame. So I'm stoked that it exists and that they're doing better things and they're going to have a new website and a whole bunch of different things going on in the future, which is awesome. But that's the Hall of Fame. I got derailed to where I was going, but I will get back into your career. And you started with the U.S. ski team when they had nothing. You were probably in debt for all I know, trying to get as many pennies as you could. But then you guys build this thing up. We get to 2002, and it's like a crescendo of awesome for the U.S. ski team. Are you involved in the development of the Center of Excellence and everything that you built around the athletes and for the athletes?
Yeah, very much so. And I'm going to tell you 2 stories on this one. The first one comes even before 2002. I was telling this story the other night to somebody. We do this gala in New York every year, and I think they raised $4 million at it this year. The ski team ball in New York for many, many years. And somewhere around the mid-90s, so I'd been with the organization for 6 or 7 years. I'd never been to one. So we go out to New York. I think we're at the Pierre Hotel, I believe. And we had a whole bunch of athletes who were there, this very distinguished little ballroom. And up on the stage, there were like 10 or 12 of these kind of velvet-covered, cushy chairs. And in the chairs, there were members of the New York committee. And none of them athletes. They were the ones putting this on. They were the people with the money, and that was good. That's really important. But the program that night was a microphone being passed, and each of them kind of made a pitch to the audience. There was no introduction of athletes, no engagement of athletes or anything. So my colleagues at the time, and this would have been, in particular, Tricia Worthington, who actually is still with the organization, we talked about how we need to celebrate athletes. We need to put athletes up on stage. So the next year, we came in, and that year, I was in charge of the program. And it was difficult working with this New York committee because they liked it their old-fashioned way. But we started putting athletes on stage. We started to do ceremonial announcements of the athletes. And we built that up over time. We started to bring in big-name entertainment. But it was all about the athletes. And that's what it should be about. So over that time span, we started to make a lot more money for the athletes because we showcased the athletes. And then we fast forward up to the Center of Excellence. That project launched in 2007. It opened in 2009. And we spent about 2 years on the road. Tricia spearheaded this along with one of our trustees, Peter Kellogg. And every week, Tricia would meet up with Peter. They would hop in his private jet, and they would go off and they would meet people. And Tricia, she tells a great story here. She would talk about how she would want to go in and say, well, let's go in and ask this person for $100,000. And Peter would say, no. We're going to ask this person for $2 million. And we had no perspective, but people like Peter Kellogg helped us to forge that highway. And we raised the money to build that Center of Excellence. And now I look at that, the facility is 15, 16 years old. What an amazing asset that is for ski and snowboarders in America.
Think about it. When you're going into your first Olympics in 1980, what did those athletes have?
They didn't have much. And actually, though, a few years, and I was there in 1980. I'll tell you a story about that in a minute. But if you go back to 1973, the U.S. ski team had kind of put down stakes in Park City. And it was actually, folks may know the name of Edgar Stern, who is known for developing Deer Valley. Well, he owned Park City ski area at the time. And he got together with Willie Scheffler, the coach of the U.S. ski team, and they decided to build a training center in Park City. So they went into some of the old mine buildings up at the Silver King mine. For those who know Park City, that's the base of the Bonanza lift now. And they looked at using these old mine buildings. It didn't work. It was ill-conceived, but the plans were good. And when we built the Center of Excellence, we kind of dredged out those plans for the 1973 training center. They were pretty much the same as what we ultimately envisioned in 2009. But going into Lake Placid, no. There was no training center. There was no gym. There were no strength coaches like there is today. There was no sports science program, no medical program. All of that stuff has come since then. And it's an amazing facility. It also has been a proving ground for athletic trainers who then go on to the big money jobs in professional sports.
Huh. Interesting. Thinking back to that first Olympics when they didn't have what they have today. I mean, for you, you're a wide-eyed, really young guy. Can you describe that experience of going to your first Olympics? It's got to be so exciting.
Well, it was. And at the time I was working in cross country. So I had two jobs in Lake Placid. One was I was the assistant press chief for cross country. Cool job. And the other one was I was a stadium announcer with my best friend, Peter Graves, for cross country. And I only worked the first half of the games. I needed to get back for the American Birkebeiner race, unfortunately. But it was cool. And if for folks who've been to Lake Placid, it's this teeny tiny town. It's no different today than it was back then. How in the world did that work? And it was challenging because they weren't really up for it with infrastructure. They had a bus driver strike right at the start, if you can imagine that. If there's one thing you don't want to screw up at a major event, it's transportation. So it had its challenges. My biggest memory there is not one of skiing, it's of skating. Eric Heiden, who would go on to win 5 gold medals at that Olympics in speed skating, he was from my hometown of Madison, Wisconsin. So I went to his first event. It was, I think, the 500 meters, and I watched his first gold medal. Eric and I are now good friends. He lives out here. But I think back as that was a really pivotal moment for me, too, to be trackside, outdoor rink at the high school, the running track flooded with water, turning to ice, and I got to watch a gold medal.
Yeah, that is pretty insane. And then thinking about other gold medals that you've been able to watch, you've been able to watch 75 or something like that over your career. But in things that you've done where gold medals have happened, you've ushered in a lot of sports. I mean, we talked about freestyle skiing. You were a big part of that, especially on the FIS side, organizing contests to prove that sport. We talked about snowboarding. You were definitely instrumental in that. But what we didn't talk about was freestyle when it debuted in 1992. That freestyle movement was kind of an American thing, it seemed like, and it captured the spirit of the American athlete. And did you have to sell that to everyone to kind of make that sport get into the Olympics?
Yeah, we totally had to sell that. And not so much to get it into the Olympics, because there was a pretty good pathway going there, but we really needed to sell it to the public and to the media. But it was interesting. It was exciting. I mean, now we take it for granted, but there wasn't anything like it back then. So Moguls made its debut in 92 at Teen France, part of the Albertville Games. Donna Weinbrich winning the gold medal for the women. Nelson Carmichael won bronze on the men's side. But we were really excited to get aerials in, and we were good in aerials. Aerials wasn't in 92, but we did get it in 94 for Lillehammer. We didn't do that well there. But Trace Worthington emerged as the first athlete that I worked with that understood the value that you can bring to yourself through public exposure. And I didn't know Trace, but he was a native Midwesterner like me. And we spent a lot of time together trying to figure out how we can best promote freestyle skiing. And at the time, we had American Airlines as a sponsor, and they had an in-flight magazine called American Way. And I couldn't get the time of day from them. I'm pitching them on this story about freestyle and aerials. It's going to make its debut in Lillehammer. I couldn't get the time of day. So I made a really ballsy decision that I was going to simply fly down to Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, walk into the offices of American Way, and talk to the editor. I didn't call him in advance. I just literally flew down there, took a taxi over there, went into the office, told the receptionist, I'm here to see the editor. And I got an audience. And I told him about freestyle. I showed him pictures. We ended up with a cover story and an inside photo spread. And it really launched Trace's career. And it's one of the PR moves that I look back on fondly that, like, I don't know what got into me to do that, but it worked.
It's just kind of like that make it happen mentality, right? Like, they're not going to answer the phone. I'll just go to them and we'll make it happen.
Yeah. And I got this from this guy, Tony Wise. He was like that. He wouldn't take no for an answer. He was just persistent and he would get things done. And that's where I learned it. It's not my nature to do that at all, but it worked for me. And I've subsequently done that a number of other times. And here's another thing I tell people that I, at that time, would look at an editor of an in-flight magazine with awe. Like, I can't talk to this guy. And I learned over time that they're just all regular people. And they're just looking, in the case of an editor, just looking for a good story. And if I've got one, he's going to listen.
Yeah, you can't have the hot girl syndrome where you can't talk to her because she's too hot.
Well, it's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. Yeah.
That's that. And then in thinking about at events, I was going to bring up Donna winning gold medal and you being in the finish corral for that, because I'm sure you got to be in the finish corral for a lot of gold medals and shuffling people off to a lot of different interviews in between doping and everything else they had to do. But when you think about access and events and stuff like that, thinking about an event like Sundance, which is right in your backyard, I'll bring that up because we recently lost Robert Redford. But do you get an all-access pass to those kind of events if you want, just because of your history?
I probably could, but I don't really seek that stuff out. I don't like that methodology, so I tend to avoid that myself. We love Sundance. We have always embraced it. We would go to films, but I would not want to be the guy that calls up and say, hey, can I get that all-access pass? I certainly get a lot of perks, but no, that just kind of wasn't my style.
How about knowing Robert Redford? Did you know that guy just through all of the different things that you've done throughout the years and being in Utah? Did you get to know him?
I didn't get to know him, unfortunately. I have met him on a couple of occasions, but my one real connecting point, my very dear friend, Joe J. Gelbert, who's a film producer, and I say film back in the ages where it was that thing with the sprockets that went around. Joe J. was a film student in the late 60s at Washington State. I think it was Washington State, and he got connected with the shoot for downhill racers. So he went over on that shoot. Well, the thing about Joe J. is he is this spitting image of Robert Redford. So when they saw that, they cast him as the ski character. So he did all the ski scenes. So whenever I would go to visit Joe in Huntington, New York, and we would go out to his barn and we would look at outtakes from Downhill Racer and some of the promos. And when Robert Redford passed this fall, one of the first things I did is my wife and I sat down and we watched Downhill Racer. And I hadn't watched the whole film in decades. And it was just fascinating to me. And that film, Downhill Racer, that came out in the late 60s, that really was the forerunner of Alpine ski racing as we know it today. And it really told a pretty accurate story of what went on behind the scenes with the tour that started in 1967.
In thinking of famous people, because I'm thinking of Robert Redford now, thinking of famous people, knowing that you are the liaison between the world and the U.S. ski team I would think for a long time, did you have like celebrities that would want to go ski with Lindsay Vonn and you would have to arrange that kind of stuff?
I didn't do it so much for Lindsay because at that time she had a sophisticated machine doing that. But, we did a lot of that. And I know they still do with the foundation at U.S. Ski and Snowboard. Deer Valley is a great example. Deer Valley has adopted that. It's a program run by Fuzz Feddersen, who was an aerials medalist in the aerials demonstration at Calgary in '88. And these athletes who are involved in this, they're busy all the time skiing with people. So I didn't have a lot of firsthand engagement with that, but yeah, we did a lot of that.
Did you hear of any famous people that were great skiers that your ski teamers would come back and be like, damn, they could really ski?
I'm not going to be able to give any name recollection, but it is interesting. There are a lot of notable people who are really good skiers. One of the individuals I work with, Fraser Bullock, who was chief operating officer for the 2002 games. He was the CEO of the BID. He has a home at Canyons, and every Friday he entertains CEOs of tech companies. And these are companies like Adobe based here with their base here in Utah and others. And they come to his house, and these guys, I won't ski with this group, actually. They are too hardcore for me. But there are a lot of executives out there who are really, really good skiers.
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, those are the people that can really afford to go on the great ski trips from what I've seen in life. But, in thinking of where am I going to go next with this, because I know I'm getting to a point in time where I'm going to get towards the end and I've got inappropriate questions as well. And I haven't covered like a tenth of what I wanted to cover with you. So it's going to be an interesting where I take this. But I like to talk about money a lot in my podcast. I'm sure if you've heard them before, I talk about that. And in the 90s, when you're managing all these athletes that are amateurs and you're not managing them, but you're the PR guy and you're definitely involved in their lives and they're amateur athletes, is it a point where you and everybody else at the U.S. ski team is making more money than these athletes because they can't really have jobs?
I'm sure that's the case much of the time. And if you go back in that time period, I'm going to go back to Howard Peterson again. In the early 90s, one of the things that was really important to Howard was, how do we get money to athletes? And skiing at the time was still in that kind of old school amateur era. And I went on a trip with Howard once to visit some of the international federations in Europe, the national federations there. And our objective was to get them aligned on a proposal that we wanted to make to the International Ski Federation, the FIS, to bring cash prizes into the sport. And there are cash prizes today. They're half decent cash prizes. It might not be like the PGA Tour, but that whole thing started with Howard Peterson and U.S. Ski Association in the early 90s. And I remember one meeting in particular. It's just a fun story. We went to the French Ski Federation it was somewhere outside of Annecy, and we go into the meeting. It was an all-day meeting. We go in at about 9:30, and we go into the meeting, and the first thing they do is they roll out a breakfast cart with coffee, pastries, and liquor. So that's how the thing starts. And then we break from there. We do about a 30-minute meeting, and then it's lunch. And they bring in sandwiches, wine, more liquor. We do that till like 2:30. Then maybe we met another half hour. So we mostly wined and dined that day, but we got their support on this proposal. We got it through the FIS, and that brought cash prizes. I don't remember the year, but it was around 95 that cash prizes came into the sport. But the whole objective was exactly to the point of your question. How do we get more money in the hands of the athletes? So that was something that, again, I'm really proud of what we did as an organization. Is we found ways to get money into the hands of athletes, to make it legal to get money into the hands of the athletes and create as many opportunities as we could.
Do things changed in the mentality and the way that you work with athletes from the point where you're able to get them a little bit of money to where they can actually really get paid? Because it starts and everybody's kind of like an indentured servant, kind of working to ski and not really get anything else. But by the time you finish, everybody's making 20 times what you're making, and they should be because they're elite athletes. But does that make it harder to work with them as well?
It didn't for me, but I mean, you can look at the examples of people like Shaun White and Lindsay Vonn, who became global superstars. I wouldn't say it makes it more difficult, but there's more channels you have to manage. And one of the things that I did right from the very start, going back to the 90s, I made friends with the athlete agents. And a lot of people I worked with looked at them as the enemy. I always looked at them as like, hey, I need to get things done with the athlete. You're the best friend of the athlete because you're the one that's putting money in their pocket. So I want you to be my friend too. And I still have great relationships with those athlete agents. And, for me, I think that really helped me as time went on. Like with Lindsay. Lindsay has a very big team right now. Her agent is a really close friend of mine. He lives in Park City. I have shared an office with him the last few years. She has a publicist. She has a social media team. I just get to know them. And if there's something that I need to deal with Lindsay, I know who to go with. And they also know and trust me. So I think it's about relationships. That's what we've been talking about here. It's about relationships and how you build them and how you nurture them.
With relationships and thinking of Lindsay in particular, you pretty much knew her family before she was born, right?
Yeah, that was kind of an interesting coincidence. Her father, Alan, was our ski area attorney when I worked in Wisconsin. So I knew him. I knew his racing background and I knew his temperament. And actually, there were two partners in the firm he worked with. I liked the other guy better because he was a little calmer. Alan was just this go get him kind of guy. And I've always said that's where Lindsay got her gusto of sorts. It was from her father. But I knew Alan Kildow, and I didn't know the rest of the family, and I wasn't really with him at the time that Lindsay was born, so I don't have that piece of history. But throughout her career, I stayed in touch with Alan, and it was cool that she came to Paris with us a year ago for the BID Award for Salt Lake City, Utah, and he came as well. And it was really good to see him still involved in the game and still supporting his daughter.
What's amazing about your life and times is that you've been surrounded by all these athletes, but it's like you're never around C or D grade athletes. You might be, but no one ever thinks that. You're around the A-list people, the U.S. ski team, the best in the world. And when you think about like the Lindsay Vonns, the Tommy Vos, the Mikaela Shiffrins, all the different athletes that you've worked with over time, I mean, are there some common denominators that all these people have in common that make them great? Or is it everybody so different?
First of all, I really cherish the time I've had with all athletes, not just the elite ones. I mean, the elite ones are the ones that, you have the stories about because they're in the news. But, I've always tried to help athletes at every level. But, with the common denominator, there's a couple of things. One, you have to be really goal-oriented. You got to know what you want to do. No one's going to go out there and do those kind of things by accident. You have to know what you're trying to do. You have to have the mentality like Tommy Moe when you're in the start gate at Kvitfjell in 94. You have to know that you can win that race. So you have to have that. And number two, you have to work hard. And, I've seen athletes at all different levels, and every athlete's had to work pretty hard to get to the point that they're on that national team. But when you look at the work that people like Shaun White puts in, that Lindsay puts in, that Tommy Moe put in, it's superhuman, extraordinary. And you got to be willing to bust down walls. Picabo Street busted down walls. When she blew her knee out just a year before the Nagano Games, what she had to go through to get back. And then with Picabo, if you know her history, she won only one Super G race in her entire career, but that was the one that counted and gave her a gold medal. But she just was willing to go through any brick wall to achieve those goals, and she did. And that's what they all have to do.
All right. Well, that is athletes. We could really go on and on and on and on. I could talk about more athletes and more stories, but we're not going to. I close every show with something that I call Inappropriate Questions. And this is where I get someone that to ask 3 questions, and they can be anything. And this week I was able to get fellow Wisconsinite and NCAA All-American cross-country skier at Utah, Olympic cross-country skier, the longtime chief of sport for the U.S. ski and snowboard team. I'm talking about Luke Bodensteiner to ask you 3 inappropriate questions. And are you ready for question number 1 from Luke?
I don't know. I think the line, the line's disconnecting, I think. I'm not really sure I can hear you anymore.
Fair enough. Well, I do have to cue this one up, so it's going to take me a minute because I have to power on another phone. But we went all over the place in that podcast. I don't think I asked any of the questions I really wanted to ask, but I got so much information out of you that was better. So let me get Luke's thing queued up real quick. We're so close. I can see it loading. All right, here we go.
Let's recognize that Tom has worked in PR and media for 50 years. So if there's anything ever inappropriate that happened to him, he's got it covered already. So I'm going to have to dig deep on these. But I want to ask Tom, Tom, you were around at the dawn of freestyle skiing, and moguls and aerials were really American expressions of skiing and didn't really fit in well with the straight-laced Alpine and Nordic programs. So tell us, who had to be bribed to get those sports accepted by the mainstream?
I don't know of any bribery in freestyle, but undoubtedly there had to be somebody pulling some strings there. There was a lot more when we got to snowboarding, though. But I will tell an inappropriate story, though, in conjunction with this that might not be a specific answer to Luke's question. But the freestyle community, particularly the aerialists, it's really only the aerialists, they were a pretty tight-knit family here in Park City, and they trained here all the time. And they would do a spring party after the season. And I actually got invited to that spring party once. And this was before I was probably thinking soundly about what my role was and how I should conduct myself with athletes, but I remember vividly this party being held in a little clubhouse in the Sun Peak development on the backside of the Utah Olympic Park. And there was definitely drinking involved in this party, as you can well imagine. And I can't remember the specific situation. I think I came up to make some remarks or something, and there was a bottle of whiskey on the podium, and I decided to just throw it back and take a big chug, and everybody really loved that. And then afterwards, I'm thinking, I'm not sure that was really appropriate.
But that's how you bond with the team right there. That's why they love you, which is amazing. Was that the Pac-Man years?
Yeah, it totally would have been, which could lead us to some more stories, but we'll let that stand for now.
All right, we'll go into question number 2.
You were also part of the team that ushered free skiing into the Olympics. And as a part of that effort, you were instrumental in helping to organize the very first FIS World Championship for slopestyle and halfpipe skiing, which would be the event that proved the sport's readiness to be in the Olympics. A few days before that event, you organized a press conference with the first ever U.S. free skiing team. You helped introduce them to the U.S. Ski Team's Center of Excellence, where the Alpine and Nordic teams did all of their training and high-level sports science. And all Tom Wallish wanted to do was ride the rails on the stairs out back. So was there ever a moment when you thought, what the hell have we gotten ourselves into?
You know, this is an interesting one because I don't remember all of the details, but I know that I didn't have any idea really what we were getting into. Tom and I are now really good friends, but I didn't really know him back then. I didn't know about rails. I didn't know what he stood for. I think, though, the thing that got us through, is the fact that we'd been through this with Snowboard. But the story I told earlier about Animal, we were still in that phase. So, yeah, a lot of thoughts flashed through my mind. But once we got there and we got to Sochi and we really started to roll this thing out, man, it was one of the coolest things we did, is to get that sport into the games.
And you couldn't have had a better face for the team at that point than Tom. It was just squeaky clean, but awesome, cool, and core all at the same time. He's like everything wrapped into one for skiing. It's unfortunate he hurt his knee for the Olympics.
Yeah, that was a real bummer. And, you know, Tom and I still see each other once in a while. He lives up here in Park City. And as I've retired from some of my speaking roles with U.S. Ski and Snowboard, he has actually picked up some of those fairly begrudgingly. But I say, hey, Tom, you're the man.
Oh, he is so good on a microphone, and it was really cool to watch him become really great, because it took like 3 events, and now he's one of the best in commentating, I feel like.
Yeah, he's a good dude, and he, you know, like I'm your like stick to the format kind of stage thing, and I do a great stage show. He's the kind of guy that really has fun, so I love him.
All right, we're going to go to your final inappropriate question. Here we go.
All right, finally, Tom. Now the U.S. Ski and Snowboard is lobbying to add skateboarding and surfing into their lineup of programs. Is this another natural evolution to support like-minded athletes, or a distraction from skiing and snowboarding, or what is it?
I am so glad that Luke asked this question, because, Mike, I was wondering if you were going to go there. And I have to tell you, and this might be controversial to some people, I think this is a fantastic idea. And the people who are opposed to this idea of the organization known as U.S. Ski and Snowboard and getting involved in surf and skate, they just haven't paid attention to what this is about. This is such an amazing opportunity for surf and skate to get money into their sport to support athletes. And I think the people in skate have kind of figured that out, and they see that this is a gravy train of sorts. The people in surf, they're too busy trying to defend their turf, and they're not seeing the forest through the trees. And I think we've actually got some hearings coming up on this in the next few weeks. So we'll see where it goes. I'm not involved with it at all, but I absolutely love following it. This sounds crazy, but my buddy Jeremy Forrester and I, we love sitting down and watching these hearings and watching how Ski and Snowboard is willing to share its expertise and resources with other sports. So I look at it differently than some, but I'm really supportive.
It would be really funny if your name was just U.S. Snowboard. They would probably be all about it. But once you put the ski name in there, there's a question mark.
Yeah, and I think it's less about the brand, because I don't think Sophie Goldschmidt has brought a whole different perspective to that organization. I don't think it's so much that it's the brand of U.S. Ski and Snowboard that's going to be doing that. It's just they're using their people and their knowledge to build an organization that will funnel more money to athletes. And at the end of the day, as I learned from my friend Howard Peterson, that's what it's all about. How do we support athletes and how do we grow the sport?
That's Inappropriate Questions, and that's our podcast. And really, you and I could chat for days because you have so many stories, and I just cherry picked my way through a little of them. And like I said, I didn't even get through any of my notes really because you would go on a tangent, would make me think of a couple other questions, and we just kind of riffed off each other and told a lot of stories. And it's all stories that I couldn't get in any of my research or anything like that. So a lot of stuff that's all new to me. I know you tell your stories all the time, so you're familiar with them, but I think the audience is going to love them. You've had 50 plus years in the ski industry, all with some of the best dream jobs that you could possibly ever have. Not too many people can say that. I thank you for sharing your story, and I thank you for your time, Tom.
Well, it's an honor to be here. And what you do with this podcast, the work you put into the research, we're blessed in our sport to have you and to have this podcast. And I just love listening to it. And a lot of your guests, I don't know at all, but I learn about them and I learn their pathway, and I just love it. So please keep it up.
So that was time with Tom Kelly, and like I said, one of the most legendary dark men that I've ever had on the podcast. I would set Tom up with just like a couple sentences, and he would go on for 6 minutes with different stories that happened within his career. And with my notes, I mean, I had like 6 pages of notes on Tom, but we didn't really go through my notes because he had so many stories to tell. I definitely guided the interview a little bit, but I wanted to talk about Lindsay, Mikaela, and Bode, and a bunch of different things, and we did talk about him a little bit. But Tom took us on his journey and we got to hear his stories. And I think it was a really cool podcast, especially if you're a ski historian, because we're not going to get many more people that know the history of skiing better than Tom Kelly does. So thank you for doing the podcast, Tom. That is the end. At this point, I want to thank you for listening. I want to ask you to review me wherever you listen. It is very easy to do, whether it's on iTunes, whether it's on Spotify, whether it's on Android. I have no idea if it's easy to do on Android. I've never even been on an Android phone, but if you have one of those, I'm sure it's easy to do over there. So please review me wherever you listen. And finally, I want to thank my incredible sponsors who've made this thing happen. I am talking about Elan Skis, Best Day Brewing, Outdoor Research, Stanley, Descent Labs, and Therm-ic USA. Have a great week, everyone.